Kesab is a mostly Armenian-populated town in northwestern Syria, administratively part of the Latakia Governorate, located 59 kilometers north of Latakia. It is situated near the border with Turkey on the slope of Mount Aqraa 800 meters above sea level. According to the Syria Central Bureau of Statistics, Kesab had a population of 1,754 in the 2004 census, along with the surrounding villages. The sub-district of Kesab has a total population of around 2,500, with its dry climate and encirclement by wooded green mountains and deep valleys. Kesab is a favored vacation resort for Syrians, mainly from Aleppo and Latakia. Geography and climate. Administratively, Kesab belongs to the Latakia district, one of the governorate's four Manatik, and the center of Kesab Nakhia sub-district. The town has around 2,000 inhabitants, mainly Armenians. The name of the town is thought to be derived from the Latin Casabella. The town of Kesab is 59 kilometers north of Latakia, just 1 kilometer southwest of the border with Turkey, and 7 kilometers east of the Mediterranean Sea. Located at an average height of 800 meters above sea level, in the middle of dense coniferous Mediterranean forest, the town is a popular summer destination in Syria and for foreign visitors. Kesab is an ancient Armenian settlement, dating back to the period of the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia. Currently, the population is mainly Armenian with a minority of Arab Alawites. The town is surrounded with minor villages and farms with a majority of Armenians, including the villages of Dozagaj, Ezgaran, Sevapur, China, Chakaljek, Kyorkuna, Ekazaluk, Bagjagaz, Karaduran, Karadash and the abandoned village of Bashord. The town is surrounded with many mountains, including the mountains of Bashord, Darnag, Dapasa, Chalma and Seldan from the west, and Mount Al-Nisr from the south. Mount Cassius at the north, located in the Turkish side next to the borderline, is the highest peak of the Kesab region, with a height of 1,709 meters. History. Early history. The region of Kesab was part of the ancient civilization that spread from the Syrian coasts up to the Orontes River 6 millennia ago. During the Seleucid period, the Kesab region was at the center of the triad comprised Antioch, Seleucia and Laodicea. The Laodicea-Seleucia coastal road passed by the Karaduran Bay, whereas the Laodicea-Antioch road passed through the Dozagaj Valley. The Mount Cassius at those times was believed to have been the sanctuary of Zeus. During the reign of the ruler of the short-lived Armenian Empire Tigranes the Great in the 1st century BC, and later the Roman era, the Syrian coast flourished greatly and had a positive effect on the development of the Kesab region. There are no written sources about the primitive history of the Kesab region, but the first record of the name of Kesab was mentioned in a historical document dating back to the Crusaders' period when Duke Belmont I granted the region of Caspici to the family of Peter the Hermit. Caspici, Casambella, Casabella of the names from which Kesab was derived, being located on the borders of the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia. The region of Kesab was gradually developing by its Armenian migrants. A research conducted on the peculiarities of the Kesab Armenian dialect and the dialects of the Armenians in the region of Alexandretta and Suvidia shows that the Armenians of Kesab and the surrounding villages of the remainders of migrants who came from the region of Antioch. The migration of the Armenians to the region increased in the 14th and the 15th centuries, during the Mamluk and the Ottoman periods, in an attempt to avoid persecutions, trying to find much more safer mountainous regions such as Kesab and Musadar. The first Armenian refugees settled in the area now called Ezgaran. After a period they moved uphill and settled in the area now called the town of Kessab, turning it to a center of the whole region and the destination of new refugees. During the 1850s, Kasab turned into a mission field with the arrival of evangelical and Catholic missionaries, rising anger among the Armenians of the region who were following the Armenian Apostolic Church. In the beginning of the 20th century, the population of Kesab region was around 6,000, with more than 20 schools. As a result of denominational and political divisions, 20th century, the first disaster in Kesab took place in April 1909, during the Adana massacre. This calamity costed the Armenians 161 deaths and a massive material loss. After the event, Catholicos Sahagai Kabayan visited Kesab. The Armenian genocide in 1915 proved even more destructive. The command of the genocide initiation arrived in Kesab on the 26th of July to start deportations within 5 days. First, the people expressed a desire to rebel and fortify on the mountain Dunag located in Karaduran. Priest Bedros Papukyan Aprahamian, the priest of Karaduran, particularly supported the idea of the opposition, but on the real ground, the whole idea failed to become a reality. The genocide of the Armenians in Kesab region started from Karaduran. The Armenians were deported in 2 directions, one towards the desert of Deir ez-Zor and the other towards the south to the desert of Jordan. Almost 5,000 Armenians were killed during this deportation process. Some died in Jisr al-Shafra, some in Hamra Homs, while others on the way to Damascus or Jordan. The majority of the refugees were killed in the desert of Deir ez-Zor. After the ceasefire, the Armenians who survived the genocide returned to Kesab in a process that lasted till 1920. But the eastern and northern areas of the region remained unsecured, because they were constantly vulnerable to attacks from neighboring Turkish villages. A voluntary group of 40 men successfully foiled many attempts by bandits to invade the region at the time. In 1922, peace was established after the entrance of French troops into Kesab. On 5 July 1938, the Turkish army entered the Sanjak of Alexandretta and Antioch, in an agreement with the French colonial authorities, and the region was renamed Hatay State. Many Armenians left Kesab for Lebanon or took refuge in the mountains. Many important personalities visited Kesab during that time. On the 23rd of June 1939, the Hatay government was officially dissolved and the whole region became part of Turkey, by the efforts of the Armenian community of Paris. Cardinal Krikor Bedros Arhajanian and a papal representative to Syria and Lebanon Remy Leprat. Many parts of Kesab inhabited by Armenians were separated from Turkey and placed within the Syrian boundaries. The result of the annexation of the Sanjak of Alexandretta proved disastrous for the Armenians of Kesab. Mount Cassius was attached to the Turkish side, including the farms, properties, laurel tree forests and the grazing lands located in the mountains, bosoms and valleys that once used to belong to the native Armenians. Besides, with this annexation, the Armenians of the town were also deprived from the traditional and historical Bala Monastery, where the inhabitants used to celebrate the feast of Surpazd Vadzads, and during August of each year, Syrian Civil War. In the early hours of the 21st of March 2014, Kesab and its surrounding villages saw a multi-pronged attack by forces opposed to the Syrian government. It was reported that the attackers, members of the al-Nusra Front, Sham al-Islam, and Ansar al-Sham, advanced directly from Turkish territory, were being supported by the Turkish military, and that injured rebel fighters fighters were being sent to medical centers in Turkey. Some Kesab village guards reported that the Turkish military withdrew from its positions along the border shortly before the fighters crossed from Turkey. Mehmet Ali Edeboglu, MP of Turkish CHP party, who visited the area several days after the attack began, said that villagers on the Turkish side of the border told him that thousands of fighters coming from Turkey crossed the border at least 5 different points to launch the attack on Kasab. The fighters reportedly crossed into Syria from the village of Aqraa, close to the border. Journalists were barred from visiting Aqraa. Edeboglu was also barred from approaching the border by Turkish soldiers, but wrote of seeing dozens of Syrian-platted cars non-stop transporting terrorists from the military road between Aqraa village and our military base at Kayapina. The civilian populations of Kesab and its surrounding villages either fled or were evacuated, with most seeking safety in Latakia, and Kesab is currently under the control of rebel groups. On the 23rd of March, Turkish fighter jets shot down a Syrian fighter jet over Kesab that had been flying a support mission to assist Syrian army ground forces. The fighter crashed into Kesab. Turkey claimed that the jet had violated Turkish airspace, while Syria denied this. Turkish MP and CHP party opposition leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu claimed that the Syrian jet was a reconnaissance plane and that its downing was part of a government scheme to provoke war with Syria to divert attention from corruption scandals enveloping Turkey's President Erdogan and his party. Journalist Amran Zaman wrote that leaked tapes in which Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu is heard discussing ways to spark a war with Syria might vindicate Kılıçdaroğlu's claims. On the 2nd of April, during a hearing before the House State Foreign Operations Appropriations Subcommittee and in response to a question by Congressman Schiff, U.S. Ambassador to the UN Samantha Power said that Kesab is an issue of huge concern. Congressman Schiff noted that many of the residents were descendants of victims of the Armenian genocide and that there is a particular poignancy to the being targeted in this manner. On the 3rd of April, Armenia's Minister of Diaspora Ranush Hakobian said that 38 of Kesab's Armenian inhabitants had been captured when the town fell to the rebels. 24 of them were later released, 3 had been forcefully taken into Turkey and were now in the village of Vakif, and that 670 Armenian families had been displaced after the attack on Kesab, with about 400 of the families now in Latakia. The minister also said that in Kesab Armenian churches had been defaced, crosses on the churches had been removed, and property looted. Also on the 3rd of April, Ruben Melkonyan, deputy dean of the Oriental Studies Department at Yerevan State University, said that the Armenian community of Kesab was unlikely to recover and that what had happened were crimes that make a genocide. On the 15th of June 2014, the Syrian army entered Kesab and retook control over the surrounding villages and the border with Turkey. News agencies and local residents of Kesab reported that the town's Armenian Catholic and evangelical churches had been ruined and burnt by the Islamist groups, along with the Masakian Cultural Center. Around 250 families from Kesab who had taken refuge in Latakia returned to their homes a day after the Syrian army recaptured the town. On the 25th of July, the St. Astvatsatsan church in Garachiran was reconsecrated, with the first liturgy since the ending of the Islamist occupation taking place on the 27th of July, the day of Vardava, and attended by a large number of people. Villages Duzagaj and Ab al-Mur is located around 4 kilometers south of Kesab town, near the Syria-Turkey border checkpoint. The first Armenian settlers arrived in the area of Duzagaj and founded the village during the mid-19th century when it was completely surrounded with forests. It was built on the road that was linking Latakia with Antioch. Within few years, the villages in Duzagaj have developed large farms, attracting more settlers from the neighboring villages. However, on the 23rd of April 1909, the village was attacked and looted by the Turks. In 1915, the villages were deported along with the dwellers of Kyorkina village. Between 1919 and 1920, only a few people were able to return to Duzagaj. In 1939, after the new definition of the Syrian-Turkish border, the eastern part of Duzagaj fell in the Turkish side. In 1947, the majority of the villages migrated to Soviet Armenia. Currently, the major part of the original village of Duzagaj is abandoned. The villagers built new houses along Aleppo-Kesab motorway. Nowadays, around 20 families with a majority of Armenians live in Duzagaj. Aqraa and Nurki is located 2 kilometers southeast of Kesab, only 700 meters west of the Syria-Turkey borderline. The nearby settlement of Aqraa at the south is also considered a part of Aqraa village. In 1909, as a result of an attack by the Turks, the villages of Aqraa and Aqraa escaped to the town of Kesab. However, the village was entirely destroyed and burnt by the Turks during the attack. In 1915, along with the Armenian population of the surrounding villages, the dwellers of Aqraa and Aqraa were deliberately deported towards the Syrian desert. In 1920, only 50 people out of the original 200 villages were able to return to the village. In 1939, after the new definition of the Syrian-Turkish border, the Armenians of Kesab lost the Bala Monastery, the traditional site of pilgrimage, which fell on the Turkish side. Therefore, the Armenians of Kesab built a small chapel in Aqraa to become the new site of the celebrations of the Assumption of Virgin Mary. The Syvtagi Greek Orthodox chapel, once stood on a small hill just on the Syrian-Turkish borderline, was destroyed by the Turks in the early 1980s. According to the census in 1955, Aqraa and Aqraa had only 68 inhabitants. Nowadays, 32 families live in the village with a majority of Armenians. Sevapur or Al-Sakra is located less than 2 kilometers northeast of the town of Kesab, only 200 meters away from the border with Turkey. It was originally formed as tobacco farms owned by the locals of Kesab. The hired farmers in the area gradually became the owners of the lands and formed the majority of the population in Sevapur. However, the village was finally shaped and formed at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1909, the invading Turks coming from the nearby village of Orduz burnt and destroyed a large part of the village. In 1915, 75% of the villagers were forced to leave their homes and killed during the death marches to the Deri Zeds or camps. In 1920, the village had only 94 individuals, declined from 445 as of the 1911 census. In 1939, after the new definition of the Syrian-Turkish border, major part of the tobacco farmlands of the village fell on the Turkish side. In 1947, when the Armenian repatriation process was launched, many of the villages migrated to Soviet Armenia. During the 1950s, many Arab Alawid families moved to the village and took over the abandoned farms. Currently, the main occupation of the villages in Sevapur is the production of apple. In 1990, the Aleppo-based Syriac Orthodox community established a convent in the village. Nowadays, the villages has 32 families, consisted equally of Armenians and Arab Alawites. China. China-Ural Delta was originally formed at the southeastern foot of the Koro mountain, 3 kilometers to the south of Kesab. There were two main quarters in China before the genocide, the Quarter of the Fountain, and the Quarter of Katabians. A deep valley of a length of 500 meters separated the two quarters. In 1909, the village was entirely destroyed by the Turks. In 1911, China had a population of 176 individuals, while in 1915, the number has grown up to 210. During the genocide, almost two-thirds of the population of China were killed. In 1920, around 77 survivors returned to the village and founded a new quarter at the right side of the valley. In 1947, the majority of the villages migrated to Armenia. In 1965, China had 40 Armenian families. Nowadays, the villages has around 50 families, with the two-thirds of them are Arab Alawites and the rest are Armenians. Chakhalgek is located less than 4 kilometers south of Kesab and few hundred meters west of China. The village is famous for its natural springs and gigantic trees. The Mateslek quarter at the west, named after the Matosian family, is part of Chakhalgek. In 1909, the village was burnt and looted by the Turks. In 1915, the people in Chakhalgek were deported along with the people of Kyokhuna in two separate groups. In 1947, 29 individuals from Chakhalgek migrated to Soviet Armenia. Within the last few decades, Chakhalgek was transformed into a summer resort. A beautiful district of individual villas has been constructed at the backside of the original village. Nowadays, the villages has 17 families, consisted entirely of Armenians. Kyokhuna is located around 5 kilometers south of Kesab, few hundred meters west of Chakhalgek village and around 2 kilometers east of Ekizaluk village. The scattered historical remains in the village indicate that Kyokhuna has been inhabited since ancient times. The Armenian chapel of Serp Stepanos stood on the southeastern hill of the village until the beginning of the 19th century. On the 23rd of April 1909, the Turks attacked and destroyed the village of Kyokhuna. In 1915, more than one-third of the villages were killed during the genocide. In 1947, 63 individuals from Kyokhuna migrated to Soviet Armenia, particularly from the Chalabian family. 114 individuals remained in the village after the migration process. Nowadays, the number of the residents of Kyokhuna significantly grows during the summer, when native Armenians of Kyokhuna who live in different cities of Syria or Lebanon return to the houses for holiday. Many Armenian families from Aleppo have built private villas in the village. Kyokhuna is considered a calm summer resort for the Armenians of Aleppo and Latakia. Currently, the villages has around 25 families, with the two-thirds of them are Armenians and the rest are Arab Alawites. The only active church in Kyokhuna belongs to the Evangelical Armenians. Ekizaluk was built at the beginning of the 19th century. It is located around 4 kilometers west of Kasab. The population of the village were mainly involved in agriculture. During the Turkish attack in 1909, the villagers abandoned the houses and took refuge in the Latin monastery in Bagdad. In August 1915, the people of Ekizaluk were deliberately deported to the Syrian desert and the village lost more than two-thirds of its residents. Between 1919 and 1922, when there was no official authority ruling the region, Jade organized a group of volunteered soldiers to provide security to Ekizaluk, the nearby Valley of Honey, and the other surrounding villages, with the assistance of the volunteers from the town of Kessab. In 1947, the people in Kesab did not welcome the migration process to Soviet Armenia, with only 20 individuals have moved to Armenia. The only active church in the village is the Armenian Evangelical Emmanuel Church, as the entire population of Kesab turned from apostolic to evangelical in 1855. Since the mid-20th century, Armenians from Aleppo started to invest in Kesab. Consequently, it became the first village to have water and electricity network and a paved road to link with the town of Kesab. Nowadays, the village has around 35 families, consisted entirely of Armenians. Bagjagas or Al-Mashafar is divided into two parts, Upper Bagjagas and Lower Bagjagas. Both of the parts are located on the way to the coastal village of Barsat, at the southern slopes of the Seldian mountain. Upper Bagjagas is located around 12 kilometers southwest of Kesab. The village was founded in the mid-19th century. In 1915, many villages from Upper Bagjagas were deported along with the residents of Kesab. The census carried out in 1920 showed that 14 families were living in Upper Bagjagas. In 1947, 81 individuals from the village migrated to Soviet Armenia. Lower Bagjagas is located 14 kilometers southwest of Kesab, only 2 kilometers away from Upper Bagjagas. The village was founded at the beginning of the 20th century. Originally, the Armenian residents of the village were Turkish-speaking and very few of them could understand the Armenian dialect of Kesab. Thus, they were registered without the suffix "ian" attached to the surnames. The Latin Franciscan order established a monastery in the village and took the Armenian villages under their supervision. They founded the monastery on a large landscape in the area of Kabachina. In 1909, as a result of the Turkish attack, the Armenian refugees from the surrounding villages of Kesab region found refuge in the monastery and latterly moved to the village of Barsat, aided by the monks of the monastery. The villagers were able to return to the houses after few days of the attack. In August 1915, the villagers were deported towards Jisr al-Shafur, Aleppo and Hama. 3/4 of the villagers were killed during the genocide. The Latin monks continued to serve in the village until 1946, when they left Kesab and Bagjagas, and handed the properties over to the Armenian Catholic community. In 1947, the majority of the villagers of Lower Bagjagas migrated to Soviet Armenia. Nowadays, the villages has around 55 families, with the 2/3 of them are Arab Alawites and the rest are Armenians. Karadash is located 2 kilometers west of Kesab at a height of 990 meters above sea level, on the way to the valley of Karaduran. Karadash remained abandoned until 1942, when the many residents from the nearby village of Karaduran moved to the area of current-day Karadash, escaping huge landslips. Starting from the 1990s, many more families from Kesab and Karaduran have moved to Karadash. At the beginning of the 21st century, Armenians from Aleppo have built many villas and compounds in the village, transferring it into a summer resort. Nowadays, the villages has 25 families, consisted entirely of Armenians. Karaduran, also spelt Garachuran or Al-Samra, is located in a valley 4 kilometers west of Kesab. Starting from a height of 900 meters near the Dapasa mountain, all the way down towards the Mediterranean Sea. The village is an assembly of 9 small and large quarters spread all over the deep valley between the Bashord and Dianag mountains. Each quarter is named after the family that occupied the quarter, including the coastal quarter, Kalemdarian, Khazarian, Sagdekian, Titizian, Solan, Yeralian, Zartirian and the largest one Manjikian. Karaduran was considered to be the most crowded village of Kesab. The census carried out after 1909 showed a population of 1,286 in the village. By the end of 1920, only 45% of the 1915 genocide survivors were able to return to Karaduran. After the definition of the new Syrian-Turkish border in 1939, most villages of Karaduran lost the farms and properties, which fell on the Turkish side. In the 1950s and 1960s, around 800 villages from Karaduran left for Soviet Armenia during the repatriation process. The village frequently suffers from landslide, which forced many villages to move to Kesab, to the nearby village of Karadash. Currently, 2 Armenian Apostolic and 1 Armenian Evangelical churches are functioning in the village. Nowadays, the village has 45 families, consisted entirely of Armenians. Bashord was located near the Syrian-Turkish borderline around 7 kilometers west of Kesab, approximately 5 kilometers westwards Karadash and 600 meters north of the valley of Karaduran. It was originally the main grazing area of the shepherds in the region of Kesab. The village was founded during the mid-19th century. As a result of the Turkish attack in 1909, the residents were forced to abandon the village, which was completely looted by the Turks. During the genocide of 1915, the residents of Bashord and Karaduran were driven towards the city of Hama. After the genocide, the population of the village counted only 45 inhabitants, declined from 85 individuals as of the 1911 census. However, the definition of the new Syrian-Turkish border in 1939 allocated the properties of the Armenians to the Turks, a fact that made it impossible to preserve the flocks grazing in the area. In 1947, the entire population of the village, around 65 individuals, moved to Soviet Armenia within the frames of repatriation process. Nowadays, the half-ruined homes of the abandoned village could be seen in the area.